Okay, welcome everyone to our first CAQDAS webinar of 2021, organised by the CAQDAS Networking Project, which is based in the Department of Sociology at the University of Surrey. I'm Sarah Bullock and I'm joined today by my colleague Christina Silva in hosting this event. We have another series of exciting webinars coming up over the next few months, so please do keep an eye on those. All of the webinars that we run are recorded and recordings are available on the given YouTube channel at this link. We would also like to draw your attention to the range of online training that's coming up, all of which is discounted at the moment in recognition that these are really difficult times for researchers everywhere. There are many reasons to use digital tools for qualitative analysis. In this webinar today, we discuss how dedicated CAQDAS packages can be used to illustrate quality. I will start the presentation and then I'll hand over to Christina. Please do post your questions in the chat function as we go along. At the end, we'll select a few questions to answer live here. Any questions we do not have the chance to answer here, we will endeavour to provide answers to, along with the recording of the webinar after today. Could we also please ask you to keep your microphones off during the webinar to preserve the quality of the audio? Thanks very much for that. Quality in qualitative research. What does quality mean in qualitative research? Well, this depends on the project. It changes from project to project, but it is true to say that quality and the conceptualization thereof is always embedded in methodology and the underlying paradigms. So, depending on what methodological approach a project will take, what constitutes good quality research will vary. But some considerations around this are worth considering. First of all, sampling. Who we talk to in our research and how many people we talk to is going to differ depending on our methodology, and conceptualizations of quality around sampling differ accordingly. The same goes for whether we want to tell stories about a group of data wider than those involved in the study, or whether we're more concerned with telling in-depth stories about the meaning attributed to events and experiences by a smaller group. Secondly, methodology is also going to determine what is good practice and high quality when it comes to the role of the researcher in the project. So in some projects, we might find the researcher seeks to take a neutral stance, and we might therefore find more standardized questions being asked perhaps than in other approaches. On the other hand, you might find that the researcher takes a view that the data as well as the analysis is co-produced and contingent on time, place, and those involved at the time. Thirdly, methodology is also going to determine the way in which the concepts of validity and replicability are discussed and approached, and the weight that is given to them in any piece of research. There are, of course, many more considerations around quality and what that looks like in research more widely. So whilst there are no universal criteria around quality and there is no one-size-fits-all when it comes to quality for qualitative research, there are nevertheless some frameworks that have been developed over time, such as this one by Meyrick, which focuses on quality approaches to the whole of the research cycle. This here is also a generic framework that looks at the whole research cycle and quality around that. All stages of the research cycle are in some senses analytic, but today we're going to focus on how tools can be used to help illustrate the quality of analytic technique and process. In looking at the role of CAQDAS packages in facilitating the illustration of quality, it's important to say that in our view, at the CAQDAS Networking Project, it is perfectly possible to do high-quality analysis without using CAQDAS, and inversely, to do bad quality analysis when using CAQDAS. So that means the tools themselves do not guarantee quality. But we will today discuss how they can facilitate the illustration of quality, specifically in relation to three aspects: transparency and transferability, verification of interpretation, reflection and reflexivity. We're going to talk about each of these in turn, and we're going to provide you with some examples from a range of different CAQDAS packages. Now, it's important to say here that our intention is not to show all CAQDAS packages or to make comparisons between products or tools in this session. The screenshots that we've chosen are based on illustrating our points clearly. So if you need more information about the differences between products, then the reviews on our website are designed to facilitate this and to enable informed choices. So do have a look at those. Today, we're talking at a higher level, using particular tools within CAQDAS packages to illustrate our general points about quality. Let's look then at this first point of transparency and transferability. Within this, we're going to look at four different subpoints. The first is the idea that a CAQDAS package provides a container for the whole of a research project. And this is a statement true of all CAQDAS packages. It is possible to bring into one CAQDAS package a whole range of different materials. So general flexibility with regards to file formats, with most packages managing textual materials as well as images, audio, and video data is pertinent here. Value of having all materials in the same project to trace working across them to evidence quality is key. The second point here is around documenting our process, and specifically documenting the process at a higher strategic level. So an example of such an activity would be, for example, a research journal. All packages provide writing tools, and some of these are going to be showcased later. Memos are an important part of this, and we're going to show a few examples of working with these to demonstrate quality. The third point here is about documenting our process at the technical level. And here we're talking about tools that are available in some packages that automatically log the actions undertaken in a project for later review and dissemination. And we're going to show you a few of these. The fourth point here is around facilitating teamwork. This is all about being transparent across a team's various members about how working is taking place. And this is, of course, key to quality. This means that everyone's work needs to be accessible in order to ensure processes are equivalent across the team. Packages deal with this issue in a variety of different ways, with some enabling concurrent transparency, whilst others rely on work being merged at various points, leading to transparency at certain time points. We will talk about this in more detail. Let me show you a few examples of the issue of documenting process at the strategic level. And here we're turning to an example of how a memo can be used to document process. All packages provide writing tools as mentioned, and memos are an important part of this. Here we've got an example of a memo in vivo. So on the right-hand side of the screenshot, we see the content of that memo. And this memo is being used as a space in which to plan out how a particular research question is going to be answered, with tasks set out in stages, starting with clear analytics tasks, which lead to certain activities in the software. So I can write these down, these different tasks down, and I can also, as my research question changes over time, critically, I can change my writing, I can update it, I can add in dates, I can turn this into a log, and thereby create a documented process of how a particular research question has been answered and how it has changed over time. We can also code our own writing in a memo. So if you see on the right-hand side, there's a margin in which we see colored stripes. These represent codes that have been attached to the writing within the memo. And this can be helpful in taking a more systematic approach in documenting the process throughout the research cycle and also across different pieces of writing. Let's look at another example of documenting process at the strategy level. Here, the example is around linking from a memo content to other parts of the project. So as well as coding, it's possible to link from writing to relevant pieces of data. And here in CAQDA, we have a piece of writing, in this case, a draft literature review, where we can see on the bottom left a little pop-up, a free memo pop-up, which is the draft literature review that I'm writing, linking to sections of a relevant article. So on the right-hand side, you can see a PDF of an article that I'm reading, which I'm drawing on to write in my memo. And I'm linking between sections of my writing to sections of the article inside the package in CAQDA. Whichever package you're using, bringing together all data with your writing in this way, in this one container, that is the project, allows you to trace ideas and integrate insights with data, both of which are really important in terms of evidencing quality by being transparent. As well as being able to document the process that you undertake yourself in the way that we've just seen within memos, it's worth also noting that some packages have the ability to automatically record every user action undertaken in a project. And this is what we mean by documenting the technical process. These logs are then available for later review and dissemination. So in this example, this screenshot here, we see the command log in CAQDA Minor. A few things to say about this. This is an editable space, so I can write in it, I can change parts about it. It's active, and that is to say that it can be rerun. This log can be rerun in order to redo certain actions in the software. And this is particularly useful if you're doing a longitudinal project where you need to repeat waves of analysis on new waves of data. You can also undo certain actions through the log and capture your thoughts on an action in the form of a comment in that column on the right-hand side there. In this way, the command log allows the capturing of actions automatically, but it also allows the researcher to add to these in the comment box. In terms of documenting the technical process, there's another example here, and this one is from In Vivo. It looks a little similar, however, it's a little more static than the CAQDA Minor version. But the principle of capturing the process of user actions automatically by the software is similar. Documenting process in this way is key to being transparent in the dissemination of one's own work. But it's also vital in allowing for process and findings to be transferable to the work of others. Now, the final point that we're going to make about transparency and transferability relates to teamwork. Being transparent across a team is clearly key to quality. Everyone's work needs to be accessible in order to ensure processes are equivalent across the team. And software packages deal with this in a variety of different ways. At the top there, we have online applications where multiple team members can log onto the same project at the same time and therefore work concurrently. The group of packages on the left are purely online applications, whilst the packages on the right at the top there exist as local installations and online applications. Some programs come with both single and multi-user locally installed versions. In other packages at the bottom, they are single user only, and researchers need to consider combining work at multiple stages in a project, and this happens by merging. Where multiple coders' work needs to be formally compared in the software, this can be done in some packages through the calculation of inter-rater reliability or inter-coder agreement. So here in this screenshot from Atlas TI, we can see that some coding has been undertaken by multiple users, and this has been brought together here in a way that allows us to look at intercoder agreement or the absence of it. In this example, in Deduce, you can set up different tests for looking at how different coders have approached their work. And here is an example of a code application test result where you can get a Cohen's kappa score. So this is a much more quantitative approach to comparing coding across different groups of people. And a score closer to 1 reflects a higher level of agreement. Now, whether you expect or are seeking agreement across a team is determined by a project's methodological approach and underlying philosophical stance. Yeah. So where agreement is sought to ensure quality, we have just seen that packages allow this to be evaluated in a range of different ways. Shared understandings of concepts and equivalence can be attained both through discussion between people, between researchers, and through statistical evaluation, as in this example here, depending on the methodological approach. So how you address the issue of equivalence will be informed by what quality means to you in your project. So this brings to a close now our discussion of how CAQDAS tools can be harnessed in the service of transparency and transferability for quality purposes. Next, we're going to turn to their use in relation to the verification of interpretation. And here, I'm going to hand over to Christina to continue.
Fabulous, thank you. So I'm going to move on and speak about the second two aspects of quality that we're covering today, namely verification of interpretation and then reflection and reflexivity. So, verification of interpretation. In the search for quality, however that's defined by your methodological context, the act of verifying interpretations generated from the data is, of course, really central. And we're going to discuss that today in relation to three aspects. First of all, verifying interpretations by tracing accounts back to the source data at will, so whenever we need to, is a really key way of checking and evidencing to others how our findings were generated. This act is facilitated by all CAQDAS packages because their tools allow us as the researcher to trace our interpretations back in a variety of different ways, and I'll show a couple of those later. Sarah's spoken about equivalence in the context of team working and transparency, but this issue is also fundamentally important to the work of individual researchers. The evolving nature of qualitative analysis really means that understandings of concepts and how they're applied to qualitative data really do change over the course of a project. So I'll explore briefly some of the ways in which CAQDAS tools can be harnessed to check quality in terms of internal consistency in our analytic work across a project and over time. Thirdly, interpretations are frequently generated as a result of bringing together the different elements within a project. So, for example, we might be exploring themes across groups of participants with different socio-demographic or other characteristics. We might want to interrogate the properties and dimensions of themes, or indeed look at the intersections between concepts in terms of how they've been applied to the data. So all CAQDAS packages provide tools that allow us as the researcher to ask questions about our data and about the analytic work that we've done with our data previously by making use of what are often a really broad range of searching and querying tools. So this is a really extremely powerful and systematic way of bringing together the different parts of an analysis to identify patterns, relationships, and anomalies. So first, in terms of going from an account or interpretation back to the data, CAQDAS packages are all designed to facilitate this, and they do so in a variety of different ways. Here, I've got an illustration of it as an export from QAQDAS. And this is actually a screenshot showing a Microsoft Word file displaying an extract of a transcript that's been exported from the CAQDAS package, QAQDAS. And you can see that the codes that have been applied to the data within QAQDAS appear as comments in the margin in this Word output. You can also see that different colored highlighting is used to represent the different codes. And this kind of output is particularly useful when there's a need to share aspects of analysis with those who don't have access to the CAQDAS package that you're using for whatever reason. It's also a nice way of illustrating that how data have been coded in a report or thesis or article, etc. So although this illustration is showing output, it's worth being aware that similar displays to this are present within all CAQDAS packages as well. And you'll see some more examples of that later on in the screenshots, and indeed a couple of the ones that Sarah showed already show illustrated codes as they've been applied within CAQDAS packages to data. But the point that I'm making right now is really that these sorts of displays allow verification of interpretation because of the illustration of codes, which of course can represent concepts, themes, categories, whatever you need them to represent, but doing so back to the source data and of course in relation to one another. Okay, so in this example, which comes from a different CAQDAS package, Transana, the act of tracing interpretations back to the source data is illustrated by going back through multiple accounts of the same phenomena. So here we're within the software rather than showing export, as I showed with QAQDAS just now. And at the top right of the screen, you can see a video stream. Actually, there's two, and they've been synchronized together. So we've got two visual representations of the same phenomena here. And also to the left of those videos, those synchronized videos, we can see the associated audio waveform at the top left, which is the kind of red bar right across the top. So these together, the audio waveform and the visual representation, constitute the source data. What you can see below are three transcripts that have been generated by the researcher to represent different aspects of those source materials. So each of them provides a different representation, and those different representations can be whatever you need them to be. In this example, there are three, but you might have two, you might have four, whatever you need. And it could be that one of them represents a verbatim textual transcription of what's being said in the kind of very traditional way. But you may also use transcripts to represent a more summative representation of what's going on some higher level. Or indeed, it could be a log of non-verbal interaction. These transcriptions can be whatever you need them to be in relation to your analytic focus. But the point is that these multiple transcripts are also synchronized with the source data, and they can be worked with independently, so one at a time, but also together as the needs of your analysis requires. You can also see in this screenshot at the top left, just below that waveform that I mentioned earlier, that codes have been applied. So the codes here are being displayed in a horizontally, which is different from what we saw. I think Sarah showed you en vivo earlier with vertical margin showing the stripes. But the application or the act of coding any or all of these transcripts is always traceable back through each individual and across all of them, back to the source data. And that's all to do with the fact that whenever you use a CAQDAS package, everything is interlinked. And that's one of the key useful things in relation to tracing back through these different representations, going from our account or interpretation back to the data. Okay, so Sarah mentioned earlier the evolving nature of qualitative analysis means that our understandings and application of concepts change, sometimes quite dramatically, over the course of a project. And that's because of the characteristic iterative and emergent nature of qualitative research. Therefore, equivalence in terms of verification of interpretation is at times about comparing segments of data with one another that have been previously linked to a code. So the fundamental ease with which CAQDAS packages allow the researcher to pull out all previously coded segments of data at the click of a button really facilitates this aspect of quality. So here I'm showing an example from en vivo, and in the middle we can see that there is one code open, and that is showing us all of the coded segments across a variety of different data files in this one project, all in one place. So on this display, they are all textual segments of data coming from interviews or focus groups maybe. But if we'd also done analysis of visual materials, I showed you visual materials in Transana just now, if the same code has been applied to visual materials or literature, whatever, all of those different segments of data from those different source materials would all be accessible, visualizable in this one space. This allows us then to compare all of these individual coded segments and evaluate the extent to which the code has been applied consistently, because we're able to pull them up and look at them all together in one place. You can also see in the margin that vertical display again now is showing how other codes have been applied to this data. So all the data we're looking at in the middle has been applied to one code, and then the co-occurrence of other codes applied to this same data is visible in the margin view. And that's a very powerful display. Finally, the pop-up window on the bottom right of this screenshot is showing a list of all of the data files that have got this code within them so far, and providing various information about the coding at those individual files for the one code that we happen to be looking at right now. So that's a key way that we can check for equivalence. And I guess the point is that this is available at the click of a button within CAQDAS packages, and also means that that process can be really systematic because it's all in one place. Okay, seeing all of the coded segments out of context in that way, as I've just shown you in en vivo, is really useful for quality control, and also really useful for the development of themes or concepts. But it's worth remembering, of course, that it can be just as useful to see the coded segments within the source data in order to take account of context. And in most qualitative projects, context is really important. So here in Hyper Research, I want to show how we can retrieve coded data within source context. So on the right-hand side, we have the display of a data file. It happens to be a newspaper article in this example. And on the left-hand side in the floating window, we can see a list of segments of data from various different newspaper articles. There are some from The Guardian, some from The Times, some from The Sun, etc. And those individual segments of data have been linked to various different codes. You can see the list of codes on the left-hand panel there: interventions, ethics, uncertainty, etc. And the instance or one of the instances of the code interventions is highlighted on the left and illustrated on the right in that blue highlight. So here we can, from the list of coded segments in the middle, we can access those data within the source context very easily just by one click. And it's that linking up thing that is really key to what we're talking about here, and which is what, of course, you don't get when you're coding using non-dedicated tools or working entirely manually. Okay, let me move on then and talk about identifying patterns, relationships, and anomalies. Interpretations are frequently generated as a result of bringing together the different elements within one research project and exploring patterns and relationships and anomalies. So how this happens in CAQDAS packages actually varies quite significantly from package to package. And there are lots and lots of different ways in which these patterns, relationships, and anomalies can be visualized. So what I'm going to do today is just show you a couple from a couple of different programs, just to give you a flavor. I saw earlier in the chat, actually, there was a question about comparisons. We'll talk about it in more detail maybe later, but on our website, we have got reviews of, I think, 14 or 15 different CAQDAS packages now, which give you more of the detail where you can get that comparative angle from. Remember, our intention today is not to talk comparatively about specific things that are possible in each of these different programs, but to talk, as I think Sarah said at the beginning, at a higher level in terms of the general idea of quality and the sorts of ways that the use of these programs can contribute. So what I'm showing here on this screenshot is coming from Deduce, where we can find on the left-hand side under where it says Chart Selector, Deduce provides a range of different predefined charts that we can choose from as a way to interrogate patterns and relationships. So in this example, I'm actually showing 4 different charts. So the bar chart in the background is a horizontal bar chart, which is showing codes by factual characteristics. And in this example, that is different learning activities by the ethnic background of the participants who contributed to the project. The matrix in the middle, in fact, there are 2 matrices, aren't there? The one in the middle is the one I'm going to talk about, actually. That's a table, a matrix, which is showing intersections of codes with other codes. So each row represents a code, each column represents a code, and this is picking out patterns of co-occurrence in the codes. And of course, the codes might represent themes or concepts or categories, whatever you as the researcher decides they mean. And this is giving us, in the first instance, some frequency information about the number of co-occurrences between each row and each column. So that's a key way of picking out what I would call gaps and clusters. The pie chart shows the relative frequency of categories in terms of the characteristics of the sample in this example. But the point here is that in all of these charts, and these are just a couple of examples in Deduce, there are many others, both within Deduce and in other CAQDAS packages, but the point is that we're abstracting from the data in visualizations like this, yes? We're thinking at a higher level, but going back to that point of interconnectivity, the qualitative data always sits behind these visualizations. So if I was, for example, to click on one of those cells in that matrix, I would be able to retrieve the qualitative data that sits behind that pattern or relationship. And that's really, really important in terms of tracing back to our source data and the different aspects of quality that we're talking about today. Okay, so here's another example, and this is from CAQDAS, where we're looking at comparison, but this is visualized very differently from what I've just shown you in Deduce. So here, what we can see are segments of qualitative data that have been coded to the same codes, but organized in columns according to, in this example, whether the participants are male or female. So what makes this different to the previous visualizations in Deduce is that here we're displaying the actual qualitative data comparatively, whereas previously we were abstracting up one level, but always able to get back to the data level. The point, as I said earlier, is that there are a whole host of different visualizations that help us identify patterns, relationships, and anomalies, and that we can use to assess the quality of our work. Okay, one final thing, which is quite different, is that it's also possible to identify patterns, relationships, and anomalies for the purpose of verifying that we haven't missed anything. Okay, and in some programs, like Discover Text, which I'm showing here, the software can actually help with this process. So here in this example, Discover Text has what it calls an adjudication tool, which allows coded data to be reviewed and categorized as appropriately coded or not. So one way in which you may use this comes from a team project, and Discover Text is very much designed for team working, whereby you would set various different researchers the task of coding, and they would code a subsample of the data. Here in the screenshot, it's Twitter data. And then one team member would check the coding and tell the software whether the segments of data have been coded appropriately or not. And the software then learns from this adjudication process, and subsequently you can ask the software to apply the rules that it's learnt from your human adjudication to a much larger set of data. So this is a very powerful way of combining human interpretation with the power of software in terms of machine learning and handling and analyzing vast quantities of data. Okay, so I'm now going to move on to the third aspect of quality that we'd like to discuss today, which is reflection and reflexivity. So these are really closely related concepts, but they're not the same. So the first, reflection, is more general, and it encompasses capturing thoughts about every single aspect of a project throughout the project, from the kind of procedural to the analytical level. Whereas reflexivity is specifically about reflections that pertain to the role of the researcher in relation to the researched, and also in relation to the project as a whole. So therefore, we would argue that reflection is relevant to every single qualitative project. Capturing your reflections as you have them so you can build on them is really important in every qualitative project. Reflexivity, conversely, plays more or less of a part in considerations around quality, depending on the methodological approach that is taken. So Sarah mentioned earlier that in some projects, researchers might want to be more neutral in terms of how they're working, whereas in other projects, that kind of objectiveness is not the prize, and we want to co-produce what we're doing. So we're working from a more constructivist paradigm. So that will affect the degree to which reflexivity plays a part in terms of quality. So I'm just going to give a few examples about how CAQDAS packages can be used to capture thoughts at 3 different levels. And I'm going to talk about capturing thoughts at the data level, the coding level, and the interpretation level. So capturing thoughts at the data level is all about making comments about specific chunks of data as we view them. And this can happen completely separately from, or indeed completely to the exclusion of coding. So you don't have to code when you're using qualitative software, CAQDAS packages. Many people do code, of course, but not all methodologies employ coding. Here I'm showing MaxQDA, and you can see how this kind of commenting at the data level can be accomplished using what MaxQDA calls its paraphrasing tool. And that's akin to how comments work in Microsoft Word in some ways, because they're visualized in the margin. And you can see at the top right there is a little comment that's been made in this paraphrasing tool, and that's linked to that green highlighted text in the middle, which comes from an interview transcript. And you can also see previously created paraphrases can also be accessed in little pop-up windows in MaxQDA. So the one that you can see in the box towards the bottom right of the screen is linked to the passage of data that is highlighted in blue. So this is all about capturing thoughts at the data level and then being able to access them very easily again later. So similarly here in a different package, F4 Analyze, we can see the data in the middle, but the comments, which in this software are called in-text memos, are actually embedded in the data rather than being displayed in that right-hand margin view. So if you look carefully, you can see the data is actually numbered, the lines are numbered, and line 15 is actually a participant, I think it's actually me, saying something. And then just below that is an indented bit of writing, and that's the in-text memo. So that's not what the participant has said, but that's a little note that the researcher has made whilst reading that data. So here, those little comments in text memos are embedded in the data. And what you can hopefully see here is that not only is that a different display, but those in-text memos can be coded along with the data. So in F4 Analyze, we don't have a margin view with the codes being displayed, but the codes are displayed with different colored underlinings. And you can hopefully see that both the data and also the comment that was made at that point are coded together. You can also write at various different places. And at the bottom of the screen in this example, we've got a memo which is about the whole transcript as well. So different levels of which you can write, and that's true of all CAQDAS packages really. Okay, so one more example here, but this time capturing thoughts at the coding level. Here we're showing QDA minor, and in QDA minor you can apply comments to coded segments. So the previous 2 examples we were applying comments to data, whether it's coded or not. Here we're applying comments to coded segments. And in QDA minor, it's possible to attach multiple, up to 6 different comments to each coded segment. And this gives us a way of organizing our analytic thoughts in 6 different ways, up to 6 different ways. We don't need to use all 6 of them, of course, we might just use 2. But the point is that we've got multiple ways of organizing our writing at one particular coded segment. And they are organized by color, so you can see different colors, and also by labeling what those different colors represent. So in this example, using yellow to denote things to follow up that are sparked by particular coded segments, and green is being used to make little comments about one of the specific research questions that are sparked by the data. Okay, I'm conscious about time, so I'm just going to see if I can go slightly faster. And this is another example about capturing thoughts at the coding level, this time from Delve. And thoughts can be captured in a variety of different ways across all CAQDAS packages at the level of coding, if you're coding, of course. And these thoughts may pertain to the definition of the codes, which is an important thing to keep track of, because the meaning of codes will probably change, but also the instructions for how to apply those codes in a consistent way, which of course in a team working context is particularly important. So what we can see here on there's kind of three aspects to this screenshot. The left-hand side is just showing you some data in the background in Delve. And again, like F4 Analyze, coded segments are indicated by different colored underlinings. But what we're really talking about here in this illustration comes in, first of all, in the middle panel, where we can see multiple codes: advice seeking, external approval, free talking, etc. And that's a list of codes that have definitions. You can see that some of the definitions are longer and more detailed than others, but this allows us to see all of our codes with all of their definitions together. And then on the right-hand side, when we're thinking about the changing meaning of our codes, maybe, then it's going to be useful to see the data that we've already coded at them in the same place. And that's what we're seeing on the right-hand side, just looking at one code, advice seeking, and being able to see both the definition of that code and the data that has so far been linked to that code all in the same display. And that's really, really useful when you're focusing on moving your interpretation on. Capturing thoughts at the interpretation level in some ways is very similar to capturing interpretations at the coding level, because those two things go hand in hand often in that kind of iterative nature of what we do. But a key benefit of working in CAQDAS packages is that, as I've said before, everything is interlinked. And that interlinkedness is really clearly illustrated in this screenshot showing a network view from Atlas TI. And in this network view, we can visualize all kinds of different components in the software. So we can visualize segments of data, which may have been coded, but equally may not have been coded, may just have been commented upon. And we can also, in this network view, visualize comments that have been made at the data level, but also maybe comments that have been made at the coding level. We can also visualize links that we may have made between codes. So if we think that the one theme or concept is associated with or related in some way with another, that can be represented and visualized in a network view. And we can also integrate our higher level interpretive reflections into these networks in Atlas TI. So you can see on the right-hand side there, there's a big red circle around what is actually a memo in Atlas TI, which hasn't yet been linked to anything, but could be if we wanted it to. But we can access the content of that memo and edit it from within this visual network view. So the point is to do with being able to visualize the different levels in the same space, and that helps us with that kind of tracking between and across levels in various ways. So here we see something similar, but displayed in quite a different way. Back in CAQDAS, we are now, and you can see that we can create tables that display coded data. So in the background at the left, you can see 4 codes as rows: career, health, home life, and recreation are the codes that are displayed as the rows in this table. And then we've got columns, which in this example represent individual data files. They actually are transcripts with interview participants, Max, Joanna, George, and there's others that you can't quite see. So we've got a table of codes by data files. And in the middle part there, just to the right, we can see the coded segments. So at the moment, we're looking at the intersection between the code career and the data file Max and seeing the coded segments. And then adjacent to that, whilst we're retrieving the coded segments in that way, we can summarize what we're thinking about that when we retrieve it in that way. So it's a kind of comparative display, but as allowing us to interpretively abstract to the summary level here. And having generated some summaries, we are able to then compare our own summaries, which is what we're seeing in the part of the screenshot to the bottom right here, where we're seeing summary tables, which are showing us our summaries at a slightly higher level of abstraction. So abstracting in this way, sometimes it's called data reduction, is an integral part of many qualitative methodologies and analysis techniques. And tools like this allow for those abstractions to be both grounded in the data and layered systematically and at the same time. And that really does contribute to ensuring the interpretations are of high quality because, as always, we can drill back down and get to the original data in its source context at the click of a button. Okay, so those are the main points that we wanted to talk about today. So just to summarize briefly before we open up for questions, throughout our discussion today about the role of CAQDAS packages in our quest for quality in qualitative research, what we hope to have shown a little bit is the central strength of these programs in the way that they can be used to support researchers' access. So we've been touching on access in all kinds of different ways today, thinking about how software can provide access to the materials that constitute our projects, how they can be used to give us access to the ideas that we have about our projects, how we can use them to access the processes that we undertake, and also how we can use them to access the twists and turns of different processes and making those available to others in a transparent way. And making things available to others is really important in terms of quality, because of course we're always looking to understand how projects have been done as one means of judging the findings that are written about. So these kind of 4 aspects of access have been written up in one of our blog posts that you can access. I can see that we've forgotten to put the link on the slide there, so I'll make sure I do that before we send the slides out to you. But I just wanted to finish off by just reiterating what Sarah said right at the beginning of the session today, is that the tools that we've discussed and CAQDAS packages generally do not in themselves guarantee quality. So Sarah said it very clearly earlier that you can do good quality analysis without using CAQDAS packages, just like you can do bad quality analysis whilst using them. So really, it's important to emphasize that quality continues to lie with us as researchers. But what we hope to have done today is to help set out some of the ways in which the use of CAQDAS packages can be harnessed to illustrate quality, whatever that means in your methodological context. Okay, so I'll stop talking now. I think there's been quite a few questions. Sarah, maybe you want to take over.
Yes, thank you very much, Christina, and thanks to everyone who is here and has been here. over the course of this webinar. We have got a couple of questions here, Christina. If I read the first one out. We have a question which is around verifying reliability of a coding strategy, so coding reliability, but if you're working on your own rather than in a team. And so the question is, would it be possible to code the same material twice with some time lag in between and then assess the reliability of one's own coding across those two instances of coding of the same piece of data? So I would say, Christina might add to this, that absolutely that would be possible. That would be a useful way of proceeding if you wanted to have a look at how your coding might have changed over time. There's a variety of different ways that that can take place. You could have the same document and code it twice, but hiding the coding that has previously happened, and then comparing that. One could also duplicate the piece of data in the project and code it twice and compare how that's been coded. Christina, did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
I think only that I think it's a really good question, because it really speaks to the idea that we touched on, actually, that you know, that coding is a process, not an event. So the way that we think about our codes inevitably changes as we look at more data. And in some methodologies, we intentionally go and collect more data as we go through that analytic process. So absolutely, these programs have been designed with that idea in mind. So it's definitely possible, and you know, many researchers would argue that that's a really key aspect of the process, actually, as well.
Absolutely. Thank you. So the second question that we have here is, do either of you or both of you select the package that you use according to, say, your research questions or methodology? For example, are some more quantitative, some more qualitative oriented, others, say, more ethnological or narrative?
Can I answer that?
Yes, of course.
Okay, so my answer to that, this is Christina, my answer to that is absolutely yes. And actually, Sarah and I spend quite a lot of our working lives helping individuals and teams make informed choices between different CAQDAS packages if they're in the situation when that's a possibility. So Sarah and I are actually in a relatively unique situation, as that we have all of these packages available to us because of the nature of what we do. And our role at the University of Surrey. So we absolutely will choose different CAQDAS packages according to the individual project that we're doing. Not everybody's in that situation. Most people probably have access to one, maybe two sometimes, and some people are completely restricted to whatever is available in their local institution. So although we would argue that some programs are better suited for certain types of projects, it's also the case that if you don't have the ability to make that choice, then you can almost certainly make whatever you have available work for you just by, harnessing, manipulating the software and coming up with workarounds if there are particular things that are not possible. It's also worth saying, we didn't say it, we should have talked about it maybe when we were talking about transferability, Sarah, but it's also worth saying that there's now the ability to transfer analysed data from one CAQDAS package to another. And I can send you all some information about that when I email later on the slides and the recording. But that means that if you're locked into one particular program, but you need a tool that's available in the other program, you can export to the other, undertake that task. So there are increasing possibilities for that sort of thing.
Great. And final question now, because we're up against time, is a really interesting one, which is there any functionality of CAQDAS yet to be developed that you still miss in your work? Because if there were, it would possibly increase the quality of analysis. Sorry, I've misread that, because if it was there, it would possibly increase the quality of analysis. It's an interesting one, isn't it? Because sometimes we can't really envisage what isn't yet.
I think I might have to think about this in a bit more detail before committing to an answer. But my gut feeling is, if I take all of the different programs collectively together, then there is a massive amount of things that are possible, right? Within each individual package, there's obviously less possible because they're all coming from a particular position, and some of them are specifically developed to handle particular methodological challenges or whatever. Yeah. But across the variety, if we were to list every single possible thing, then I think we're pretty well served at the moment.
Yeah. Yeah, I would say that the one thing that I often find in speaking to users is the team working element of it, that where people are not able to concurrently work on the same project and therefore need to work on separate projects and merge over time. There are some things within that that it just means that quite a lot of that process needs to be very, very carefully mapped out, and can be quite challenging. Not to say that teamwork isn't challenging when you're working in a concurrent way, but I would say that that's probably probably the only one that I would pick up.
Worth thinking about a bit more, Sarah. You and I probably ought to think about it a little bit more as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, well, that brings us to a close. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here. And we wish you a very, very happy new year. We will make this recording available shortly, and any additional thoughts that we've got about that final question, as well as a few other links that we mentioned today. And we will be in touch with all of that shortly. But thank you so much for joining us today, and we hope to see you on one of the future, if not more than one of the future webinars that are coming up. All the best. Bye-bye, Nafa. Bye.
Thank you all.